Now that you've created a list, examined it, and designed the type of self-defense you want to use, you need to test the practicality of it. Today we're going to disseminate the information we put down for our studies, and then test our theories and applications with a partner. Stay tuned, we'll talk about it. Welcome to Shihan's Dojo. I'm Shihan Marty Husband, and I'm here today to help you build your martial arts skills and knowledge. In the first 3 videos in this series, we started off in creating what we were going to need to practice with our partner on certain self-defense techniques. After we examined our techniques that we were going to use, as well as the self-defense we want to apply to it, we're going to need to test it to see if it really does work. If you haven't seen the first 3 videos and you want to get an idea of where we're going with this video, I'll leave a link up here at the top so you can check it out and possibly start from there if you'd like. Otherwise, let's get started. Sometimes when we have a problem, we start trying to see if others can help us fix it. But in doing this, we can close our mind to how we might be able to fix the solution to our self-defense or problem by ourselves. I always thought Pagil had one of the greatest ideals for understanding how to learn. It's learning to play with what we know, to learn what we don't know, and figure it out through this type of an experimentation. We forget we did this a lot when we were kids. I've seen many times when children will go out and play and then figure out something just by experimenting and goofing off with each other. We sometimes have to get rid of our old way of thinking just to solve certain problems. And by playing, we can also throw away these preconceived notions that we have in our own mind, not the knowledge necessarily. We can begin then to understand what is being taught to us information-wise, either classically or in conventional styles. And by playing with these techniques that we're trying to use, we can also begin to understand how they might be effective or not anymore. By continually playing with the ideas of your techniques, you can sometimes spawn boundless ideas of how to use those techniques in self-defense. What you learn by playing could be an opportunity for you to discover something about yourself and your martial arts. Now, getting to self-defense itself, the first thing I want you to understand is never start off with a self-defense technique quickly. You have to go through and examine each of these techniques from varying angles to make sure that whatever you're trying to use for a block or a parry is useful and will efficiently work for what you're trying to accomplish with that technique. Now, mind you, there are some techniques out there that are common in all fighting systems that are pretty efficient in and of themselves. The problem is each individual really needs to study these techniques to understand how they can be applied for what they're trying to do. Without testing these, you cannot have confidence in the technique, and it might throw you off just a little bit if you ever really have to use it in a real-life situation. In the last video, we tried to use the street hook punch in order to help us decide different ideas and how they might be applied. We will continue today to use this hook punch and study the different variations with a partner that might come along. This will include various angles and ranges that are necessary for you to technically become proficient and have confidence in what you're trying to do. Now, the first thing I always like to start to do is examine the block or parry I want to try to do with the partners. We have the partner come in slowly so we can then determine how our ideas will work against the technique that is being thrown at us. So after you've gone through and done that slowly for a bit, maybe then jump into doing a counter slowly to see what possible targets you might have depending on where your hand position is. It's very important to understand what you're following up with or the possibilities of what you can follow up with depending on the situations in self-defense. Sometimes these ideas and that have to just come instantaneously with an automatic reaction, and in order to do that, you have to train and see how it's possible. This will also give you a better idea what is opened up on your partner, so you might be able to see if your self-defense technique is correct or find something you might have missed in the examination. It also helps to keep your partner safe. That way you can both see what is possibly going to happen and possibly help yourself to prevent fewer accidents. It's very important that you practice this over and over again until you can see that punch coming in your mind. By doing this, you'll establish what the brain sees when these techniques are coming. That way you can build up a little faster reaction time. That way you can understand the movement that is coming in so you can adjust your footwork when it's necessary for that type of self-defense. It will also be apparent that you need to work on both sides with the technique. If it was coming in with the left, maybe you need to practice it on the right side to make sure the technique is still going to work, and that you're training your eyes to see it from any direction. Because on the street, you never know what arm they're going to throw because they might be right-handed or left-handed. After you've gone through that first technique, then you can begin to add your secondary techniques to the training. This secondary, of course, should be like the hook punch because in most situations, you're going to get 2 hook punches coming in. This will allow you to see how the follow-through is coming in close up and be able to take your examinations to see if they're going to work. It also gives you a sense of realism to know that the opponent in real life probably wouldn't stop if you have not been able to counter or stop them from coming in. In reality, you can't do this one or two times and say, oh, I understand it. It has to be done over and over again. Thousands of reps should be done in order to train your mind, your body, and the physical movements you might have to use in order to get to the proper end game. It's also important to over-exaggerate the motions of the hips and the legs in order to better understand the flow of the counter that you are going to use in this type of a situation. It's necessary that you look exactly where you're hitting your opponent after you parry between the first and the second techniques. You also have to make sure when that counter is coming out, it's hitting a prime target that will be of some use to get you to slow down the secondary hook. I always make sure I'm hitting some prime target before I'm coming around to parry or block the secondary hook coming in. Be careful not to do this quickly when you're learning this, because it can injure your partner if you hit them just right. Safety is always a primary concern with a partner. You want to continue to train all the time so you understand what's going on. The next part of it, we will show you how to handle the variations and angles that come in at you. You can easily have your partner start off at a 45-degree angle from your right or left. This will help you to understand that roundhouse punch or street hook punch better when you see it coming from a side view rather than a head-on view. It will also help you to understand how quickly you need to turn your body in order to proceed with the parry and then counter. Don't forget that I said in the other videos that these techniques may not work for you 100% of the time, even if they work for me. Never take anybody's technique as gospel. This is necessary to help you think about your self-defense techniques, and it's how I teach my students to examine and review their own techniques for their own personal way of fighting. Once you've completed the cycle of 45 degrees, you can move the partner to 90 degrees or 45 degrees behind you. This will also help give you an idea how quickly you would have to turn and be able to be ready for the technique coming from an angle to the back. Make sure that if your partner knows that you mess up the block or something, that they should try to control the punch so they don't hurt you at that time. Their control is absolutely necessary, but not necessarily to the point they can't thump you so you understand what failed and what didn't. It's really important that you can understand how a technique can blindside you. That way you can see how it might be possible to handle them. Blindsiding is very dangerous, and sometimes you can pick up on a movement or a sound and be ready to go. By spinning around, you'll learn how to gain control of that technique even quicker than before and be able to test that realistic situation more readily. Always take the time to understand what happens if you don't make it around in time, and how you might have to change certain possible angles or footwork in order to prevent from being hit. Sometimes have the partner do something a little bit different to make your mind catch it quickly and change as necessary. This will help you to come up with the idea if you're going to have to change what you're doing or do something a little differently that you didn't expect. Also take the time to understand what happened if you don't get turned around all the way, and how you might have to actually come up with something a little different than expected, and self-defense such as kicking the opponent's back leg out after parrying the block. Don't hesitate to experiment with your partner to see any patterns or systems you might better use in this situation. Now, most of these we've been doing by punching range. Now, this next part we're going to do is basically in the grappling range, where a person might grab your shirt right before they punch you. In doing this, you'll be able to test whether your parry or block works effectively at a close distance. Sometimes people overlook how it can be used in different ranges. Yet, if they can find this technique that works, it can be trainable, repeatable, and actually build up the process so your muscle memory will do that without thinking. If this type of block works at all levels, then you can really train fully with it and implement how you're going to use it. Next, don't forget to test these techniques even on the ground. A lot of people think that all fights go to the ground. I don't believe that. However, if it does happen, you better be able to sit down with your partner and have them on top of you to figure out if your technique will be able to be applied in this type of a situation. If this common technique works, then you have something that you can expressly work on all the time and keep trainable no matter the situation. It really doesn't take much for somebody to take you down sometimes and be right on top of you and start punching your face real easily. So make sure you take this type of an idea into consideration and how you might have to handle it. Practice it several times, even on the ground, to make sure that this parry and attack has a high percentage of working. Now, once you're comfortable with this technique and how it's used in, say, the roundhouse hook punch, you might be able to add it into other variations, like someone swinging a club at your face and head. The action itself is pretty much a roundhouse punch or hook punch, as you want to call it. And with this theory, we can similarly handle this type of a situation. The important thing to remember here is, if this primary parry works, then there's less training time you'll have to worry about in order to handle these types of variations. That kind of muscle memory is nice to have in your back pocket when the real situation comes along. As always, make sure when you're doing new ideas or that, especially with weapons, you take the safety precautions necessary to not hurt you and your partner. Yes, use clubs and plastic knives or something that's not necessarily going to hurt, but still remember, you can hurt each other. Safety is a primary concern in order to let you train every day. Now mind you, you're going to have to do thousands of repetitions like I said earlier. If you don't, this is a useless exercise to you. In the next video we're going to look over what happens when this technique fails and what you should do about it. The truth of the matter is, techniques will fail. It can happen, and it will happen. That's Murphy's Law. Now, if you enjoyed this video or learned something, jab the like button down there and tell your friends about it so we can have Shihan's Dojo grow. If you have questions or comments, leave them down there in the section so I can get back to you as soon as possible. I love to answer questions or ideas, or even better ways to make better videos for you guys out there. Good luck on your training, and we'll see you again here on Shihan's Dojo.